Alrighty, Shalom Uvracha Chevra, thank you so much for joining. So excited to jump into our limud tonight. We have a lot to learn today, depending on where you are in the world, but for us in Eretz Yisrael, we have so much to get into, so important, so fundamental, very interesting, very, very interesting kind of limud that we have tonight, B'siyata D'Shmaya, and all in the Sichos of those who are joining together to learn with us in heart and in mind. So let us jump right into it. I hope you're all having an amazing, amazing week. Just finishing setting some things up here. I'm going to share the screen so we can all see the sources. B'siyata D'Shmaya. And we are going to jump right into it because there's a lot to do. Okay, so all B'siyata D'Shmaya, really with the help of the Master of the World, we hope to be able to cover the ground that we need. Okay, so says the Heilige Rebbe, in Sichos HaRan Lamed, continuing our limud of Sefer Sichos HaRan, in the 30th teaching, a little bit of a longer teaching, an interesting teaching that seems to have been one of Rebbe Nachman's like sort of pet peeves, from a person that really didn't have pet peeves. He wasn't a person who was makbid b'chlal, but it seems that this was one area that he sort of got hung up on and wanted to make sure, and we're going to learn why, that people were very aware of this. And it seems also, I guess, the history of it is that this was an Indian that was a little bit more prevalent in their times than ours, but I think there's still a limud that all of us can take, even though the parameters, and the circumstances of our living might be a little bit different than things were back then in Ukraine over 200 years ago. Says the Heilige Sichos HaRan, says the Heilige Rebbe, Schus Yagan Aleinu Ma'al Kol Yisrael, Amen. Alam avalim zman b'shvil nekiyus. On those people who waste time, and we're going to try to identify what are the themes that Rebbe Nachman is trying to speak about. We're going to learn in this piece of Sichos HaRan, but also from Chaim HaRan, what underlies Rebbe Nachman's essential message in this teaching and in these teachings. It's like a cluster of teachings, as we're going to see, that branches out slightly. But on those that waste time, b'shvil nekiyus, because of bodily cleanliness. Interesting topic. And therefore they spend a whole lot of time in the restroom trying to go ahead and make sure that they're perfectly clean, obviously for purposes of learning and davening, which a person is not able to engage in, all the while that a person is in a state of needing to relieve themselves. But these kind of individuals are sort of OCD about it, right? And they spend much more time than they should trying to make sure that they're really in the perfect state of Nekiyus, of cleanliness. Hikbid ma'oid ma'oid. You don't really find such terminology about Rebbe Nachman. We don't envision him as being a captain. Like Rebbe Nachman is more associated, I guess, with a historical vision of Hillel as opposed to Shammai. Just an of a person who loved everybody, wanted to give people chizik. But Rebbe Nachman was very makbid about this. Hikbid ma'oid ma'oid, which again is a rare lashon. And he used to sort of make fun of this kind of Indian, of people like this, ma'oid, very greatly. The herich harbe be'inyan zeh. Rebbe Nachman spoke at great lengths about this topic, v'haklal, and Rebbe Nachman stressed that the general rule with regard to this matter, but all of Yiddishkeit, what a liberating klal. And this doesn't mean, this klal, that we should take the Torah lightly, and that we shouldn't try our best to be able to attain whatever standard that we could envision, that we could imagine, to try to actualize HaKadosh Baruch Hu's dream for what our lives could be. But v'haklal, the general rule is, ki lo nitna Torah l'malachi ashares. The Torah was not given to angels. The Gemara in Brachos. And therefore, ve'ein sarach lahachmir yoser min adin. We are not called upon to try to go ahead and to achieve perfection beyond what the actual din, what the actual rule is enabling us, or is calling upon us to go ahead and to try to manifest and to try to perform. And so he says this amazing thing. He says this amazing thing that the loinit natar l'malachi ashares, that the Torah wasn't given to angels. And therefore, we're not called upon to be more machmir and more makbid than what the actual din requires of us. What's the actual din? The LPI'S din. What is the din in Shulchan Aruch on this topic? Ha'isur hu rak kishem nitzrach l'nekav of mamish. The lashon of the Shulchan Aruch, as we're going to see, the Shulchan Aruch also asks that a person make sure and check that the body does not need an added level of cleanliness before going ahead and davening and learning. But the lashon is if you need to go, right? The lashon is if a person actually is in a state where a person needs to use the restroom. Kishen nitzrach lenakav of mamish. Kamash kasav Gemara, like the Gemara says over there in Brachas Chav Gimel, hanitzrach lenakav al yispalel. A person that's nitzrach lenakav, that actively is in a state of needing to relieve oneself, al yispalel. Hanitzrach daika, says Rebbe Nachman. Why can't we understand and accept the din as presented in Shulchan Aruch? Hanitzrach. And again, this is a mashal because in our circumstances we don't find this being something that necessarily we're conscious of or thinking about, and it's not one of our hakpados. But we can go ahead and apply it to any area of what's called chumras yaseris, of additional or extraneous kinds of stringencies that Rebbe Nachman will tell us is not bringing us into such a place of dveikus and of kedusha and of openness and holiness, but on the contrary, inhibits that which we're trying to foster, that spirit of closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we'll see. But we can apply this to anything, to any area, to accept the actual lashon as it's given without needing to search for that which is beyond the actual din. Hanitzrach daika, ba'afilu kishu nitzrach lenakav mamish, yesh gam kin dina bezen. Rebbe Nachman says that even if a person b'diavad, but even if a person actually was in a state of needing to relieve oneself, there are also dina bezen b'diavad b'shas hadchak, muvu b'shulchan aruch, simin sadi beis ein sham, Magen Avraham, sharif matir, that the Magen Avraham brings, that the rif was matir lechatchila, not just b'diavad, which the Shulchan Aruch says b'diavad it's okay, but the Magen Avraham brings down that even lechatchila, if a person was nitzrach lektanim, a person needed to go ahead and relieve oneself, in the colloquial sense of the word, mutter lechatchila to daven biyachal lamed atzmi ad parsa. If a person would be able to go ahead and hold it in ad parsa until the time that it takes to travel a parsa. Nimsa we find, she'al kol panim at the very least, kishe'einu nitzrach, right? It's not talking about when you're nitzrach, okay, then if a person can, obviously, a person should go ahead and take care of that inyan of cleanliness before davening and before uttering dvarim shebekdusha and engaging in kedusha, also because it's distracting. But beyond that, of course, to have a guf naki. But says Rebbe Nachman, if a person doesn't need, kishe'einu nitzrach lenakav of mamish, ein sarach lahachmir. A person doesn't go ahead and need to go ahead and make this part of their routine, because who knows? Maybe if I try. That's not called nitzrach. That's not called, and Rebbe Nachman said, don't start with this kind of approach to Yiddishkeit in this area, because it spills over into other areas and it does more harm than good. Ein sarach lahachmir ulevatel atzmai, and here we find again what's underlying this. What's Rebbe Nachman essentially trying to communicate? He says, levatel atzmi mitayro uvitfila. It's ultimately going to bring a person to a place of being mevatel from the time that could have been spent in more davening, the time that could have spent in more learning, and it's ultimately a waste bechinam for no reason. Machmas chashashos, v'chumras, yiseras, suspicions, and extra stringencies, and he goes very strong here, v'shigoyin ba'alma, and insanity, and craziness, just craziness, extremism. You don't need it. Like Rebbe Nachman says in Nun Aleph, as we're going to see in Sichos HaRan. Nun Aleph is one of the most important pieces in Sichos HaRan. We'll get there, Be'ez Hashem. We're getting there. We cover a lot of ground. Chazi Hashem, I think we're like 20-something shiurim in. What a privilege. Mamish, we're really covering ground, so we'll get there to Nun Aleph. But over here, Rebbe Nachman again says, we don't need chumras yiseris shigoyon ba'alma. Rak toiv lehispalo ba'boiker tekev achra midasai mimitasai. Don't go ahead and spend a whole lot of time on this inyan unless we need it. Right away to daven, right away to involve ourselves with kedusha and whatever our morning routine of holiness is. Right away. Take evachra midasim imitasai, daven when you get out of bed. Im efshar bekal lifnais, efshar if it's you're nitzrach, you're in a geder of nitzrach lenakav and you actually need to relieve yourself. Okay, so then bekal efshar, then you should do it. Im lav. You don't need, period. You go ahead and you daven. V'yispal kach and daven. V'afilim choishes b'meyav. You have a stomach ache and you're choishes. Maybe una lo yashkiach lo yistakal as a klal chumras yiseris shigoyin ba'alma, and we don't need that. That's part one. Part two of this is the same inyan. Is gam ein stricham laharech bebeis hakiseh. Another thing that's sort of a secondary inyan to this is we don't want that Jews should be spending inordinate periods of time in the bathroom. And you find today that it's strangely a prevalent thing because today we have entertainment, right, at our fingertips, and oftentimes you can find people who are just sort of sitting there for a whole lot longer than is absolutely necessary for the function of why the person went into that place in the first place, because a person is just going through their phone and their feed on Facebook or WhatsApp statuses, and that's being marich in the Beis HaKisei for no reason. Rebbe Nachman says, "Hu mazik ma'od." It's very damaging. Over here he speaks about physically damaging, but it's just not a place where a Jew should hang out. It's not a place where we should be. A person can't think in Torah in such a place. It's not a place of Kedusha. We don't want to cause ourselves to be mushpat, to be impacted from an environment that's essentially associated with waste and everything in the klipa that is. We want to connect to Chaim, which is one of the reasons why we're not allowed to think Torah thoughts in the bathroom, is because it's the exact opposite of what the inyan of a bathroom is, what the inyan of a restroom is. The Torah is nice as Chaim, right? Everything that's associated with the restroom is waste. It's what's called the klipa, meaning to say that the body absorbed whatever vitality was possible to absorb from within the food, and what's left is mamish misa, is mamish what's mace. It's pashut waste. And therefore, the Torah, which is something that's nisenas chaim, eitz chaim hilamachazikim, can't think Torah thoughts in the bathroom. That's a deeper havana. Obviously, on a simple level, it's a makom tameh, and the Torah is kaddish. That's on a simple level. But beyond that, this is a little bit of the reason. And so we don't want to spend time in a makom that's associated with misa. That's on a spiritual level. Rebbe Nachman says over here, he's speaking about physical health. Mazik ma'od l'brias haguf. Again, you have to know whether the Metzias changed in terms of the circumstances that existed back then, in terms of what their bathrooms looked like and our restrooms. And over here he's going to give an example of why that might be, and it doesn't apply today anymore. But still, the spiritual reason is very, very powerfully applicable even today, that a person should make sure not to spend too much time in there. And to make, it sounds bizarre, but to make gedarim, because if we know that if we're going to go in with our phone, we're going to spend more time there. A person should make a gedder, leave the phone outside, whatever it is. But this, we should be conscious of this. A Jew doesn't belong in the restroom. A Jew doesn't belong in a place of waste, right? And so that means you get the job done when a person needs, spend as little time as necessary, and and we're finished with that place of misa. To be conscious of this, right? The premise of being conscious of this is also being conscious of how holy we are and how connected to Chaim we are, and how difficult it should be for a person to separate from Torah. You think it was easy for the Gedolei Olam, people who were kol kulei, entirely entrenched in Limud HaTorah, to spend time in the bathroom? It was very painful for them. It's very, very painful. So it's a break and it's a pause from their greatest pleasure and tainug. And so a Jew shouldn't even want to. It should be painful and difficult for a person to spend time in such a place, for all the aforementioned reasons. Over here he says it's mazik ma'od l'brias haguf, physically damaging. Kamach haloim bayim, there are many sicknesses that come from this, befrat bebeis hakisei shelanu, which was very interesting, because how many people do you think Rebbe Nachman envisioned this Torah reaching, this particular sicha? I mean, he was speaking at the max, at the last year of his life, the last Rosh Hashanah, to 600 people. It wasn't as if, his Svarim were being translated into other languages and like it is today. But Rebbe Nachman had such a vision that he knew that he was going to be speaking to you and me. And so he made a distinction between their restrooms and the circumstances in later restrooms, what that would look like. So he says bebeis hakisei shelanu, because he was communicating to us across the sands of time. So he's making the distinction between our circumstances and their circumstances. Pretty fascinating. Otherwise, why would he need to say bebeis hakisei shelanu? Just talk about not befrat bebeis hakisei shelanu. All of the restrooms in the Ukraine, presumably, share the same circumstances. So it's interesting to hear that he's making some distinction, because he sort of knew that he would be speaking to people who were going to exist in a very, very different matziv, right? So that's interesting to note. But befrat bebeis hakisei shelanu shetzrichen li es toila behen. I don't know the Metzias, but it seems to be that there was no place to sit, that they sort of had to suspend themselves. And I think that there are certain third world countries where it's also the same. They don't have even chamber pots, they don't have. They just mamish in the wild. Toila behem. Rebbe Nachman says this kind of motion or physical sort of structure of a person being in such a matzav of like sort of crouching or suspending, that could be very damaging to the body. It could cause hemorrhoids, it could cause all sorts of bodily ailments that come from this. Right, that comes from this ma'od, Rahman al-Islam. Bottom line, a person should be very, very careful not to spend too much time in the restroom. Again, we can take the reasons that apply to us and the reasons that I mentioned spiritually in terms of what the restroom is, and that it's not a place for a person that's connected to Chaim, like Jews are very deeply. It's not a place for Chaim and Maves. They don't go together. It's not the place where a Jew should be hanging out. Not a place where you can think Torah. It's not a place of kedusha. Not a place where we belong. And so, therefore, part one of the Sikha is to go in there when we need it, and part two is to get out of there when we no longer need it. That's the Nakuda that we're trying to give over here very powerfully. Not something that we ordinarily think of in terms of our avodas Hashem, but what does avodas Hashem not encompass? Right? That's Rebbe Nachman's message. That's the message of Chassidus B'chlal and the message of the Torah as transmitted through these tzaddikim. Okay, so now we go back. A person should not search after chumras, these extra stringencies. And here he uses another terminology, depressions. He calls them depressions. Before he said it's insanity. Over here he says it's just depressive. Because this was not said in our generation, that a person should go ahead and be so machmir and so incredibly worried and suspicious that maybe I wasn't yotzeh, and maybe I thought that I didn't need the restroom, maybe I didn't daven properly, and ultimately that leads, like we already learned in a previous Sikha, to Marash Chayris. Rebbe Nachman said, the greatest chachma of all the chachmas is levlilias chacham klal, is to not allow ourselves to overthink, because then we're not going to be in a matziv that Rebbe Nachman described as v'chai bahem, to be able to live, to be able to genuinely find vitality and vibrancy in our avodas Hashem. It's going to be a matziv of sheyamas bahem. So Rebbe Nachman over here calls it marash chayris, and he says stay away from such a thing. We'll see from the Baal Shem HaKadosh. Wasn't said for our generations. And here Rebbe Nachman adds, V'hu atzmai, Rebbe Nachman himself, one of the things that makes Rebbe Nachman so beloved and so relatable was this, that he had no fear of revealing his vulnerabilities and even errors and even egregious mistakes earlier on in his avoda, in his journey, and what he learned later on, to be able to enable us to avoid those errors in the first place. And that's what makes Rebbe Nachman so beloved, because we consider him to be one of us. We consider him to be somebody who understood us. And this is the incredible pu'ula of a tzaddik who's in mamish shamayim, but he knows how to be ma'achid shmaya va'ara. He knows how to reach down into the earth and make those who are sunk into the depths of a spiritual hell feel as if this is a person who understands me. So Rebbe Nachman over here reveals that he was also v'zos hatos mikodim. He also understood that he had made a mistake. He would do all sorts of crazy stringencies because of this inyan of Nekiyus, to try to clean himself out, and maybe, who knows, maybe he took like medication to try to, I don't know exactly what's Dvarim Zarim, but maybe like just a liquid diet. I don't know exactly. And he almost endangered his physical health because of this kind of mahalech. And he was not successful in escaping some of the physical ailments that can come from such a thing. But now he understood, and now Rebbe Nachman reached a higher level of asaga v'aymer, and he is telling us clearly, you and me today, he's speaking to us. He has a relationship with us through his Torahs. Rebbe Nachman has a relationship with us, v'aymer, and he's telling us because he wants to help us. Shahakol shigayon, that it's all insanity. And it's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, and it's not what we're called upon to do, and we make our lives miserable for no reason at all, and it ends up doing much more damage than good. And it doesn't only apply to us, but it applies to our children as well, and our students, for those of us who are in teaching positions. Shahakol shigayon. It is shigayon. V'chalila levalis zaman hayakar alzeh. Chalila, to waste precious time on this. Ube'emes, and he continues in truth. It He says beyond this, that a person is not called upon, it's not necessary to go beyond what the Shulchan Aruch says from the Gemara, hanitzrich lenekavav, that it's only a person who's in a matziv of actually needing to relieve oneself, then a person shouldn't daven before using the restroom. Beyond that, it's impossible to go ahead and clean the body out absolutely, the Gamar v'lo yishar b'seichei klum, that there should be nothing left at all in the way of waste. And Rebbe Nachman knew a little bit about this. Even a person that fasts the entire week, there's a tzaddik, there are tzaddikim even in this generation, or buso, there are tzaddikim that still do this, that mamash fast the whole entire week. Ultimately, he's going to need the restroom at the end of the week. Even though it went a couple of days without this person even ingesting any food. So we find that it stays in there. So it's impossible. There's a little bit of a waste that is necessarily going to be in the body. If a person ain't ladavar sof, if a person's going to be OCD about this, then ain't ladavar sof. Like, when do you know that you tried enough? Maybe you should spend half the day in the bathroom, just in case. So ain't ladavar sof, Rebbe Nachman says, shigayon. The Torah wasn't given to angels. We're not expected to be perfect. We're expected to do what we can on the level of our humanity with full consciousness and being cognizant of this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted humans to serve him, and specifically not angels, decidedly not angels, and to be able to assume that role with confidence and with the realization that I'm only human and I can do what I am supposed to do, and beyond that, not supposed to make myself crazy. Not going to make myself crazy. Va'amar, and he said, She'davar gadol hu etzlai, she'dibar me'inin zeh. And this, like I mentioned before, you can sense that there's something more than what Rebbe Nachman's revealing here. There's a deeper inyan, maybe a deeper understanding in the spiritual damage that can come from such a thing. I don't know exactly because he didn't reveal it. But Rebbe Nachman said, Davar gadol hu etzlai, she'dibar me'inin zeh. This is a big thing to me. This I care about this specifically. And it could also be, again, that historically, Rebbe Nachman was addressing a contemporary trend, right, which is not so prevalent today, but it could be that he found that people were coming, 15, 20 minutes late to Shachris, and when he asked them, where were you? And he said, this is my chumrah. Rebbe Nachman was trying to address this, to tell people, this is not what Hashem wants. This is not k'void shemayim. This is k'void atzmai. This is an inyan of, what kind of chassid you can feel like that, you wait to daven before you absolutely perfectly clear. It's a joke. The Rebbe says it's a joke. It's shigayon. It's insanity. It's about you. It's not about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because if it was about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you wouldn't do this. Because Hashem doesn't want this. And if he wanted it, he would have told you. And he didn't tell you. He doesn't want this. Doesn't need it. He does not need it. Davar gadol. It was a big thing. Shedibar me'inin zeh ki yoytzim izeh davar gadol ma'od. Because something very important comes out from this. Again, I said we should listen deeply to what's underlying this particular message. What's the message Rebbe Nachman is telling us? Sheloi levalos zman. Time by Rebbe Nachman was very precious, because he believed in the capacity of the Jewish soul to utilize fleeting moments in a myriad spectrum of different ways to turn those moments into infinity. Whether it's through yearning, ratzon de kedusha, whether it's through tefillah, whether it's through learning, whether it's through Sichos HaRan, speaking about the tachlis of life. We should all have, as Hashem, I bless me and you, we should have good friends that we could just talk with one another about the human condition. Not how are the kids, I like the outfits that you dress them in, and what are you making for Yantiv. None of that stuff. Deep conversations. I bless us. We should mamish have that. Some of the women on the group already, Chaz Hashem, we've sort of built a community. The women that have taken the course, some of you twice, right? We've built this community of, we call it the Sichos HaRan, and it's a WhatsApp chat exclusively for these chevra that are in the consciousness of the lost princess, and it's a different kind of conversation. It's different, and I bless us all that we should be zocha to be able to taste that, what that means to have friends that we could really open up to in the deepest way, and so Rebbe Nachman understood the capacity or the potential that exists within fleeting moments. And chas v'shalom levale zman al zeh. See, the interesting thing is that I'm sure there were 1,000 chumras that Rebbe Nachman would have wanted us not to sort of focus on and lose sight of what the ikr is. But it's specifically this one that he stressed, because there are other chumras that don't necessarily take up time. Other chumras that are just, you buy an extra nice esrog, which it's a beautiful chumrah. Hasidim by themselves. Rebbe Nachman himself speaks about that kind of chumrah. Not really chumrah. I mean, that's the etzem of the mitzvah. Is hider mitzvah. The question is what's considered hider, and so on and so forth. And because kabbalistically the esrog has a lot of mashmaos in terms of the leiv and malchus and so on and so forth. But take another mitzvah that the hider of it, or beyond the hider, the chumrah yisera, that's maybe even negative, to an extreme, to an OCD extreme, but it doesn't take up time. And so Rebbe Nachman wanted to focus on an extra chumrah and sort of kill two birds with one stone, in the sense that it allows him to speak and to connote or to imply peripherally the value of time. Not to waste time, how precious time is, what we can accomplish. Each and every one of us, we're sent to the world to accomplish something vast. Mamish vast. Each person in accordance with what their inyan is. Vast. It's not about quantity, quality. To be us in our circumstance, vast what we can accomplish. Mamish. No matter who we are, what our capabilities are, what our capabilities aren't. Vast. So Rebbe Nachman says, Lo leval zman b'shul. So don't waste time in the bathroom. It's just don't waste time. Not kedai. And even if a person, he says, is in a situation where a person has a real stomach virus or something, and a person's in and out of the bathroom, he says, better be in and out. Don't spend the whole day there. Even if you know that you're going to, 5 minutes later, you're going to be, or chas v'shalom, a person, for whatever reason needs to take, what are they called, laxatives, right? For whatever reason, better go in and out than to be in there a long period of time. Okay, so this is Rebbe Nachman's restroom sicha. It sounds funny. You don't really find in other svarim such a thing, treating such a concept. But what comes out from this is two essential points. Well, a lot of points, but really 3 points. The first point is the preciousness of time, not to waste time. The second nakuda is that this kind of thing would be considered a waste of time because it's chumras yiseres that are essentially shigayon, that are essentially marash chayra, that are essentially trying to achieve a perfection that is not only impossible but isn't even ideal. That's not why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created human beings. It's not what he wants. And it's not about kvod shemayim. This is already about your own thing. And that's why it's a waste of time, and a person isn't called upon to be mechapis chumras yiseres. That's point number 2. And point number 3 is that the restroom in and of itself isn't a place where a Jew belongs. First of all, because of the physical ailments that can come from such a thing. But number 2, spiritually speaking, it's mazik. Because this is a place of waste. This is a place of death. And a Yid, there's nothing more vibrant and alive than a Jew. And there's nothing more vibrant and alive than the Torah that a Jew is supposed to be thinking about all the time, in whatever form. The Torah is so vast and broad, in whatever form, because it's a eitz chaim hilam achazikim ba, and that's why you can't think Torah thoughts in the bathroom, and that's why we shouldn't hang out in a bathroom, because each of us are an ois in the Torah. So essentially, every time we go into the restroom, it's a little bit Torah going into the bathroom. Spend as little time as possible. If chas v'shalom one of our kids were to go ahead and to take a sefer into the bathroom, how quick we would be to try to get it out of there as soon as we possibly can, right? We couldn't be so well that a sefer is in such a place. A little bit ourselves also. A little bit. Spend as little time as possible, do your thing, and get out. Zeo. Ad kan sicha lamed. Says Rebbe Nachman Chaim HaRan, let's try to branch out a little bit into like concepts, similar concepts that generally deal with the inyan of Nekiyus, cleanliness, but also branch out into a very important peripheral or secondary concept that I really want to spend time now, Be'ez Hashem, in the second half of tonight's shiur, focusing on. And before we get into the sources, I just have to express to you how precious it is to me, the opportunity to learn this Torah with you. I don't take it for granted. I'm so appreciative that you're taking the time to learn with me. I don't deserve it. It's an undeserved honor, a mamash, a privilege to be able to explore these teachings with you. And I know for myself how much hashkacha there is in Siyata D'Shmaya in terms of things that I'm able to understand that I would never be able to understand in terms of my own learning, and only comes down because of the Siyata D'Shmaya that's explicitly and specifically due to your cooperation and the shituf pula, this partnership, this journey that we're taking together. So I just want to express again my overwhelming gratitude and appreciation to you. I don't take it lightly. It means a lot to me. So thank you so much for being a part of it. So the Heilige Rebbe said, even though I can't see you, which is unfortunate to me, I would really love if it was possible at all for the Chaver to have the cameras on. It makes it a lot easier for me, but there's no pressure at all. Chas v'shalom. Okay, so the Rebbe says like this. Thank you, Heilige Shimon. So Chaim HaRan. So Rebbe Nachman says like this. Rabbeinu Zochar Levracha Hispo'er. Rebbe Nachman prided himself, as he often did, on one specific inyan shalei hischel lasei shem davar ba'olam, Rebbe Nachman did not begin to do anything kodim sheyada hasoid sheyesh bai, before he understood what's the pnimius hadavar. Can you imagine? Nothing. Did not take an action before he sufficiently understood the sod, the inner dimension of what this thing is. And this that Rebbe Nachman smoked a pipe. Was some sort of smoking device, either a pipe, what maybe today they call hookah. Over here he puts in brackets ishon tabak, tobacco smoking, a pipe, or cigarettes, probably a pipe. Rebbe Nachman didn't start with this behavior until he had some sort of Kabbalistic intention in terms of why this was something that was going to be beneficial for his avodas Hashem. And we're going to see in a minute that he very powerfully discouraged any form of smoking for his Hasidim, but for him there was an inyan LPI'S. We're going to learn in the second piece how powerfully he was like mamish strong, that he did not want his Hasidim smoking at all. We're going to learn about that. But this is one example. B'shar hanhagas, all sorts of other things. He wouldn't begin until he understood the Kabbalistic import of engaging in such an action. Here he says it right here. Even though Rebbe Nachman himself, he knew what the spiritual significance is, what smoke is, what breathing it in is, what breathing it out is, what his intentions were. I don't understand. But what Rebbe Nachman's intentions were with smoking, Rebbe Nachman was very, very powerfully warning the Hasidim, you stay away from this. And he spoke with us about this. This, that people smoke, and smoke either cigarettes. Today it's not so prevalent anymore, Baruch Hashem. But smoking tobacco today, another kind of smoking is more prevalent, but that's maybe another conversation, which maybe it's not another conversation, maybe it's exactly this conversation. I'll get into it a little bit in the second piece. But he said it's a big folly, it's a total folly. Nekiyus, which is why I'm bringing this in a moil klal. And people think that, no, I need it for Nekiyus, it cleans out the body. It doesn't. And smelling snuff. Rebbe Nachman says it's even worse. Like we speak about in another place. What is that other place? Chayim Aran 472. So this is source number 2. Hizer Aisan, it's the same Indian, it's the same Nakuda. Hizer Aisan Ma'oid. Rebbe Nachman warned us and adjourned us very, very powerfly. Not to smoke and not to use snuff. And he was very, very explicit about this, and he spoke about this a lot. And he said, it is worthy for an ish kosher, for a person that's walking in a way or trying to go ahead and live a life of kashrus, live a life that's aligned with the derech of the Rebbe, the derech of tzaddikim, the derech of Hasidus, the derech of avodas Hashem. Don't get started with such a thing. Ki heim, and this goes back to what we've been speaking about. Bittul Torah utfila bechinam. It is bittul Torah and tefillah. Rebbe Nachman didn't want to hear of this. That no, it really helps, and because learn and daven and learn. Davening, learning, and davening. We have traditionally valid forms of avodas Hashem. Yes, we need consciousness. Yes, we need heightened spirituality. I'll be preaching to the choir. I'll be the first one to tell you that. Everybody here knows that. But I believe that mineu bei, within the traditionally valid and authentic or historically authentic modes of avodas Hashem, we can foster that spirit within the tefillah that we have and within the Torah that we have. And we don't need smoking marijuana to get us into, some sort of high. What that high is it real? Is it not real? Al kol panim, it's external. The Torah and mitzvahs were supposed to supplant that. They themselves were supposed to bring us to this place of spiritual high without compromising our clarity of mind, without compromising our lucidity, without necessitating an external stimulant in whatever form it takes. Maybe even coffee is part of this. Maybe even, but that's obviously a world of a difference. But without needing anything external. Anything natural, tiv'i, to live, mamish, to live with all of our faculties intact, mamish, lucid, clear, and to engage in spirituality and avodas Hashem on a level that requires no external stimulant. That's what Hasidus is about. It's about reawakening those elements of our tradition that were historically authentic, that had a Messiah with them. I'm not going to get now into the conversation. Is marijuana, is it usur? Is it mutter? We only have one tshuva from Rav Moshe on it, and so on and so forth. It's not my place even to make any sort of statement on it. But the question always has to be, we have tzaddikim that we respect, right? We have tzaddikim, you and I, and all of us who are listening, even a person who is more inclined to this kind of behavior, which I believe is unfortunate, but every person is on their journey, who everyone respects. I look at the portrait of the Piasetzner Rebbe, right, on my shelf as an example, universally respected by everybody, right? Chasidim, non-Chasidim. We have visions of tzaddikim, gedolei olam, that all of us would agree were anashim gedolim ad l'ma'od. So we understand that a human being can reach that level. And not every single case were these people gigantic geniuses, or not every case were they the children of Gedolei Olam. There were people who made themselves and worked their way up from the bottom to the top, Rebbetzins included, etc. So on and so forth. Gedolei Olam, big people, great women, great men. We don't find that any of them utilized an external stimulant, certainly not a mind-altering one, and certainly not historically conscious of health benefits. I'm talking about smoking. That was the previous generation, was a whole different story, and today you're hard-pressed to find Gedolei Olam who are smoking like the previous generation, because we realize now what kind of damage that could cause physically to us. But certainly a mind-altering substance, lo shamanu. We didn't hear such a thing. And that means to say that it's possible for us to achieve those levels even without anything extra. We don't need it. I don't have to talk to a person about, you really shouldn't, and why is it wrong? Zelo tzarich. That's lo tzarich et ze. We have it. We have Torah, we have tefillah, and we have dveikus to kedusha, and we have limud chasidus, and we have tishin and fabrengens, and we have all of these inyanim which don't require a person to become compromised in terms of how he is able to relate to others, for example, interpersonal relationships. How is your parenting when you're high, for example, right? And so this Nekuda, because Yiddishkeit is supposed to be integrated with every other aspect of our lives, so that in the same consciousness that we would like to be when we're out to dinner with a business partner, that's how we should be in that state of lucidity with our spirituality. And we can get to that level of emotion with our natural, organic, internal tools that the Torah helps us to manifest, right? So this is, he's not speaking about that particular Nekuda, but a little bit you could hear the shemetz of this. And that's why it drives me crazy when people, colloquially, or like peripherally, externally, easily associate Breslov, with drug use, and, especially this kind of drug use. And it's mamish like, okay, I mean, you can take sentences out of thousands of pages and pretend as if this is all Rebbe Nachman ever said, but to ignore this very explicit teaching, and this is just one example, but to ignore the general mahalach of a tzaddik that stressed the importance of Maisa de Kedusha on a very basic level, Torah and mitzvahs, halacha, observance, what always was, but to refresh and to reclaim the soul that we may have lost along the way, gives off a little bit of a different impression with regard to these nekudas. V'herech b'sicha zeh, and so Rebbe Nachman goes ahead and he speaks for a long period of time about this. It's a bittul of those more historically authentic and more specifically Jewish modes of spiritual connection that are specific to us alone. It is not necessary. And Rebbe Nachman, the question was, is it necessary? Who is it for? Is it necessary? Nekiyus, and again, for the inyan of cleanliness, bodily cleanliness, a moyel ashan alulka klal, the smoking of the pipe doesn't help. Befrat misha kvar ragel ba'ashan alulki. He says specifically somebody who went ahead and has already become accustomed to this kind of behavior, shebavad ein moyel klal, doesn't help. And as chatasi, what is it? I can tell you as somebody who smoked for many years. I'm not totally clean. Like, I understand this Indian. I'm not the kind of person that was never, I myself understand the Indian and the draw. And for me, it's a little bit easier for me to say because I didn't have to like quit. One day it was just disgusting to the point that I couldn't actually force myself to take another puff, and that was it. My relationship with smoking was over. Chazei Hashem. But I understand this Indian a little bit. Eina moil klal. Eina nitzrach klal. Don't need it. It's the smoking itself that creates the need. It's not the smoking that satisfies the need. Anything that you get accustomed to eventually wears off the power. So whatever it might be for the fresh or the new smoker, eventually a couple of months, couple of years down the line, it's certainly not going to help with that Indian at all. And over here he quotes the Sicha that we're in the middle of learning, Sichos HaRan. Don't add on extra things. Don't make yourself crazy in this Nikuda. And again, it's just a mashal or just one example of many possible examples. When a person actually needs the restroom, but chutz mizeh, as a klal, one does not need to be busy with this at all. And Rebbe Nachman said on himself, and he understood, the sort of, the sort of hypocritical implication or appearance of this. He understood that. That wasn't lost on Rebbe Nachman. But over here, we already prefaced that by saying that his smoking was a different Indian. This wasn't the Indian of addiction or like sort of a person's own, for like recreational. It wasn't that at all. Rebbe Nachman was something else. So over here, even though he himself was engaged in such behavior, he made it very clear that he never smoked before davening. And I think he doesn't just mean to say that he didn't go ahead and chas v'shalom, engage in something that was for himself before actually davening, which the Gemara says horrible things about. But even in terms of the cleanliness factor, Rebbe Nachman wouldn't go ahead and use any sort of tool that was going to enable himself to increase that level of cleanliness that's necessary, because he didn't believe that there was any purpose in engaging in what he called chumras yiseres on this issue or on any other issue. Certainly not an issue that was going to be mevatel zman. Afal pi Cain, right? So you never smoke, right? And he says, with regard to snuff, Amar, he said, she's a mazik umevatel yoser mevadas habayri. It's even worse. It's even worse. Having tabak. Ki misha ragil bazeh ini yochel liyaz beloizeh. Because it's a dependency that's even more so in a certain way than smoking. It's even more addictive. The nicotine hit and the power of tabak, of strong nicotine snuff, is even more powerful, and it becomes something that's nitzrach. And in the middle of learning, in the middle of davening, a person needs to go out, right, for a cigarette. But back then it was, to get snuff. And he doesn't have, so he has to go through the whole process of bumming a cigarette from somebody else, and so on and so forth. Where you didn't need this. It's a waste. We're only in this world. All of us should live long and happy to 120. Keep our eye on the ball. What are we here for? Every moment is precious. And a person who lives in this consciousness, Zelo could die. It's not could die. Aside from the fact that it's disgusting and it's abhorrent and it makes a person smell and so on and so forth, which the smokers themselves know better than the non-smokers. They don't need to be convinced that it's an abhorrent behavior, right? Nobody needs to be convinced. They're trying to quit. Nebuch, it's hard. I get it. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard not to start in certain circles, and it's very hard to stop. In a chanami. For most people. For me, it was a little bit easier. But for most people, it's very hard. So this doesn't mean to say like if you're engaged in you're a horrible person or and it's all chas v'shalom. This is your avodah, this is your inyan. But we're striving people, and a person that's consciously connected to this kind of vision of what his avodas Hashem could look like. Why should we start with such a thing? It's very hard to quit. A broader sort of umbrella term, and I believe it covers all kinds of these dependencies, these external stimulants to which we sort of attribute any capacity for us to be calm or relaxed or connected. And it's a sheker v'chazav, it's a dimyan. Is it the worst thing in the world? We could have that debate in common. Is it usher? We're not talking about, isser v'heter here. It's not my field, that's not my expertise, not that I have any expertise, but we're not talking about isser v'heter. That's not the point. We're talking more generally from the perspective of someone who genuinely wants to serve Hashem. There's a method for that, and we don't need to introduce new things. And to be mushpa from the secular environment of what's legal or what's not legal and what communities are doing and so on and so forth, all in the name of like kvod shamayim, but like in a moment of honesty, let's be real, let's be honest. Let's first give an attempt, right, of being able to go ahead and try to foster within ourselves that level of mellowness and calm, and that level of arichas hapayim, and that level of patience, and so on and so forth, which I believe that we can get to within the Torah itself. Derechel darchi noam. Any kind of love and peace that we think that we're going to foster by virtue of engaging with either psychedelics, mind-altering drugs, and so on and so forth, different fads and trends, even within frum communities. I don't understand it. We Baruch Hashem, we have a Messiah. We Baruch Hashem, we have a Torah and a Tefillah. And we have Hasidus, we have Pnimius, HaTorah, and everything else is sort of like a bittul of that. And it's a bizayin to that. And so much energy is invested and so much time is invested in something that's decidedly secondary, but I believe, I forget about whether it's forbidden, we're not getting into that, but outside of that, it's lo nitzrach. It's not necessary. It doesn't help. It harms more than it helps. And therefore, says Rebbe Nachman, better not. Al kein toy v'nochem ma'oilev li lahargel atzmei be'inin anagis elu shalatitin v'atabak she'inen nitzrachim klal rak mazikim. They damage umevatlin es ha'adam mit Torah tefillah v'chayotz, and they draw a person away from the more traditionally valid and authentic forms of serving Hashem, because it's not about us and our feeling. It's about HaKadosh Baruch Hu and what He wants. He wants our Torah to be filled with feeling, but that's a very far cry from saying I can only do it if I'm like, if I'm in the zone. That's about you. It's not about Hashem. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu would rather forfeit in a certain way the pinnacle of what's possible for you to attain some sort of incredible spiritual, whether that's real or pseudo-spiritual high that comes from drugs of any form. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, better leave that at the door, and it's okay. It's okay. I don't need you to do that. And that's the test. Is it for you or is it for Him? Like, what if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would descend to each and every person that's of the shita that Adarabah, this is the tool that's been given to us in our time to help us reach higher spiritual levels and so on and so forth, which tzaddikim of previous generations never needed. I don't know why, right? But this is a tool that's been given to us. What if God Himself came down and said, listen, Chavrila, it's very beautiful, it gets you into a very, very spiritual mood. Better not. Like, I'll suffice with whatever spirituality you can foster within yourself. Will He drop it the next day? What do you think? I don't know. But I have a little chash that maybe it would be a little bit more difficult. Because I have a little chash that behind all of the kvod shamayim rhetoric, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. It's a davar where the Yetzer Hara is able to get involved so deeply because it's an enjoyable thing and because it's something that's physically pleasurable to many people, where it's very, very difficult to really discern what our motive is. It's very, very difficult. And a lot of times the Yetzer Hara is neslabish himself in mitzvahs. And to me, the fact that traditionally speaking, we've never needed this, and we've produced tzaddikim aliyonim, the pinnacle of what a human being can reach without any of this, that's pretty much HaKadosh Baruch Hu descending, looking us in the face and telling us, whatever you can do is fine within the system and structure of Torah and avodah in and of itself, consciously, pnimius, heart, dveikus, rachman libabai, without any external stimulants. That's what that says to me. And therefore, if we're trying genuinely to align our lives with kvod shamayim, but for real, and that's what we care about, and it's not about us, I don't believe that these are behaviors that we should be engaging in. I'll probably lose some chevra because I'm speaking about this. There are probably people who are not going to be so happy with me. And I don't care. I care because I love people and I would love to continue learning with people, and because I think that it's very foolish to write off the entire person and anything else that they might be able to share because of one particular shita. And I think that we live in a polarized society to the point that if one thing doesn't align with our very specific vision, which, by the way, doesn't really need to be so specific, because why is it so specific? Only because other people have thought, where do our opinions come from? But we form them. We're very positive. And if one thing doesn't align, lo bishvili, right off the whole person. So aside from that, I would love to continue to be able to learn with every kind of yid. But im ein das havdala minayin. The inability to stand for anything, the inability to sometimes draw a line in the sand and say ad kan is the Ratzon Hashem and ad kan is not, from my perspective at least. I mean, the chevra that are makabel from me, and the chevra that are trying to be mitzdarif to the very specific kind of asaga that I'm trying valiantly to bring down to the world, or to help further reveal, that I believe is authentically connected with what Rebbe Nachman wanted to teach and what the Baal Shem HaKadosh wanted to do, then havdala, then ein das, then just ein das at all. And das is important. Das is very, very important. Chesed is important, no boundaries. But gvulim and simtsum is just as important, if not more. And so this, I was marich on this because I wanted to sort of touch on this sensitive topic, but it's a prevalent topic. And this is the next frontier of the battle. You know, when I was growing up, even I'm still growing up, and I hope to always be growing up, but not so many years ago, in high school, maybe it was like cigarettes and like the first iPods were coming out. And today it's a totally different battle. Today, marijuana use is rampant in American schools and high schools. Even good schools, you wouldn't believe the stories. Rampant. Why shouldn't it be? All the parents are doing it. It's legal. Why not? And so this is a very important and prevalent topic. And I believe that Yidden want to serve Hashem. I believe that Pnimius, Yidden want to be Megala Kvod Shamayim. Sometimes that takes a discerning eye to be able to really face ourselves, look ourselves in the mirror, and ask ourselves the difficult question, and sometimes make the difficult, or arrive at a difficult understanding that this is not the right thing. It's just not the right thing for me, Father. This is just not the right thing for a person that's connected to a tzaddik that's telling us very clearly that there's nothing for a Jew to do in this world other than davening, learning, and davening. Anything else is a distraction, period. So it's not popular, but I'm not in this for popularity. And I'm trying to go ahead and to give over what I perceive to be emes, for the sake of lamana emes. And I believe that in Karim divrei emes. Weiter, Chaim Aran 498. With the last couple of minutes that we have left, Kfar mevur Sichos HaRan, same sort of idea. As a klal, a person should not spend an inordinate amount of time on Nekiyus. And Rebbe Nachman, fascinatingly, because we're going to learn that Rebbe Nachman wasn't interested with doctors at all. He didn't trust them, at least the doctors of that time. Now it might be a different story. Depends on who you ask. Welcome to the world that we live in, and depends on which doctor you talk to. What can you do, right? But certainly at that time, Dakdarim Gedolim, but Abiyuri quotes them. Interestingly enough, it's better for the body when it's not all the time in a state of, just relieving. That the earlier tzaddikim said that it's better for the body and the waste matter to be in a state that's more in a way of not so thick. Right, meshulshul should be more like more almost like diarrhea, but something that's more connected to that kind of inyan. That's healthier for the body. Very important to relieve oneself and take laxatives to lighten and so on and so forth. No, it's better for the body to be a little bit withheld. Even and a sick person, better for a person to be a little bit more ne'etzar v'sipur v'shmam. And he said in the name of these doctors, he says even a person that's going ahead and using the bathroom once every day, he says l'gedolim, That's chalishus. Ki tov yosel avali niftach kim pam achas v'shnei yamim. He says the most healthy thing, and a person could do certain things, I think certain foods to eat to sort of help ensure this. I looked it up online. Doctors say today that it's normal, the range is normal to 3 times in one day or 3 times in a week. Like it varies, and it's all okay. It differs by people. But Rebbe Nachman says pam achas v'shnei yamim, once every 2 days. Rak im lufa'amim adam netzar kama yamim chas v'shalom of a person is in a state where constipation for a few days. Azai tzarich lasei is a davar, right? Leftoich nekava, we can take some sort of laxative to help clean the body out. That is healthy for the body. So Rebbe Nachman already says, and he's alluding to what we spoke about, not to spend more time, not to spend too much time, to go ahead and to try to achieve this perfect level of cleanliness. We don't need it. Here's an interesting related source from Chaim Aran, Taf Pei Zayin, 487. Rebbe Nachman says, just a one-liner, Amar, this was Rebbe Nachman's Shita, HaTzadikim Shoigim, the tzaddikim are making a mistake. Tzaddikim can make mistakes too. This was a prevalent minhag among some of the Hasidic Rebbes, something that, of course, aroused the ire of the Misnagdim. They would daven very late into the day. They would spend time on achanas and mikvah and yichudim and tikkunim and different things. And then they would daven like way after the halachic zman. Rebbe Nachman says they're making a mistake. Rebbe Nachman's shita, as we'll see probably next week, we don't have time now. Rebbe Nachman's shita was that person should daven vasikin, preferably if a person can. Note there's one tzaddikus on this group that mamish davens vasikin, right? I think she goes every morning to the beach for sunrise. Amazing. And that was what Rebbe Nachman wanted. Mamish. First thing in the morning, and we're going to learn about that by Hashem next week. What the inyan of Asikin is, it's difficult. You have to know which stage in life. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder. And you have to know what you're sacrificing and who you're sacrificing. If you, and so on and so forth to do such a thing. But and what you're sacrificing later on in the day, if you're going to be so tired. Again, we have to take the holistic, normal whole of what the import of our decisions are going to be before making them. But ultimately, Rebbe Nachman wanted that people should daven early. And he said, tzaddikim are shoygim b'zeh shema'achrin zman tefillah, which might have also been part of the motive for Rebbe Nachman teaching that we should not spend too much time in this inyan of chumras yaseris, because ultimately it's going to lead shema'achrin zman tefillah. Rebbe Nachman felt that was not a positive development. Okay, 2 final sources with the last couple of minutes we have left. The Baal Shem Tov ala Parshas Eikev b'Shem habesh Sichos HaRan. The Heilige Baal Shem Tov says, "Mach ma she'ein lanu seichel chazak k'moil rishonim." It's because we do not have an intellect that's powerful like the Rishonim did, like previous generations. Ein ani yecholim lahachmer b'chol chumras. We cannot be machmir on all the chumras yiseris sheyibutal hadveikus, because it's going to lead to ultimately obscuring the bigger picture of the dveikus that we're supposed to be having. Now, we don't have time to get into this now, but this is, of course, a dangerous concept, because once you introduce this, so then you could really, what else might we be able to sacrifice in the name of dveikus, right? Where do you draw the line? But over here, of course, the Baal Shem HaKadosh is taking it as a given, that within the halachic framework, nothing can be sacrificed, and that's the point of Rebbe Nachman in the previous piece, not to push off Zman Tefillah in the name of achanas and dveikus and yichudim, not to do that. And that was the sheet of Breslov. That was the sheet of Raiv of the Tzaddikim. But the Baal Shem HaKadosh takes it as a given that halacha is halacha. Chumras yaseirus, those extra things, if it's going to get in the way of dveikus, machmas sechlenu achala, she says, because our minds are weak, lafuke rishonim. But he says it's different than the rishonim, that hayisichlam chazak, that they had a much stronger seichel, that they were able to go ahead and maintain dveikus, and at the same time be extra makbid, but it didn't get in the way of the bigger picture of what it was that they were trying to accomplish in their avodas Hashem. And that's what Rebbe Nachman wanted, right? When he said that the ikr is daven and learn and daven, and when he said that the ikr is the ratzon, and he also said that the ikr is the asiyah, we have to find a way, and we speak about this so much, we have to find a way to put these things together. We have to find a way to make a shidduch, like we speak about in the book, and we speak about in the course, between the princess and the six sons. We have to find a way to infuse those six sons elements of our avodas Hashem with the spirit of vitality, vibrancy, dveikus of the princess. And we can't allow one to lead to the negation of the other. But the Baal Shem HaKadosh Rebbe Nachman felt that taking a step into the moichin of chumris yiseiris, dikdukim yiseirim, and then afterwards, being choshesh, maybe I wasn't yoytze, lefi all the shitas, maybe Hashem didn't have nachas ruach. That's already too much of a step into the domain of the six sons, and a little bit, it's going to be pogea in the presence of the princess, and therefore this shikul, this maskala, this balance is of utmost importance, and this is something that we should be conscious of, Be'ezer Hashem, to keep our eyes on the big picture, what we're trying to do, what Yiddishkeit is, who's it for, and to be very genuine and honest about why we do the things that we do, at least be honest about it, and recognize vices as vices, and have an idealistic vision to be able to believe that you and I could become tzaddikim, not a newfangled kind of tzaddik, with a like with a joint on one side of his mouth, and mamish of old, what the tzaddikim were, shining from one end of the world to the other. What a Moshe Feinstein was, what tzaddikim were, what they always were, what Rebbetzins were, what tzaddikot were. You and I can do that, Be'ezer Hashem, the way it's always been done. We're going to do that, and we're doing it. We don't need anything extra. It's about kvoit shemayim. It's not about us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us continued clarity, hatzlacha, to be able to be nosechein be'enei Elokim va'adam, and to be able to go ahead and to stand for things, to have a backbone, and sometimes take the unpopular stance. That's okay, in a way that's na'im, in a way that's encompassing, in a way that's broad-minded in the sense that it recognizes the struggles that people have and gives people a pesach to be aware that that's their area of avodah, and to be broad-minded enough that even anybody who's listening to this, if you got to the end, even if there's one thing that you'll disagree with, doesn't mean that you have to write off the rest of the person. Have you done as kol ha'adam l'kav zchus, as kol ha'adam, take into account the entire person, and Be'ezer Hashem, we're only trying to help one another. We're on this journey very much together to help you mevarer among each other, what's the emes, what's the real emes, and I hope that Nikarim divrei emes, because it's pretty clear to myself. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us continue to learn together, Be'ezer Hashem. We have our shiur on the parsha. Oh, we don't have, I'm sorry, the parsha shiur is not happening tomorrow night. There's a special Zoom event with Reb Shlomo Katz and myself, Be'ezer Hashem and Efrat. It's going to be live. Men and women, whoever is on this side of the world and is interested in coming, can reach out to us for the address, but I'll be posting it again, and that'll be on Zoom as well and on Facebook, okay, for all those that are watching. Ashreinu Chevra, thank you so much for sticking with me, and thank you for being so my rant a little bit. Now you understand what my wife goes through. This is about a tipum nayam. Ashreinu, mamash ashreinu matev chakeni. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Kol tov Chevra. Thank you for being a part of it. Kol tov. Have a great